So I've got this new book. It's called Gon Be Alright, Notes on Race and Resegregation. And it begins, as I guess it must, with Donald Trump. But it ends with Beyonce. The book kind of follows very quickly on the heels. We were just here 2 years ago. But it follows quickly on the heels of my last book, Who We Be. And that book had looked at the question of how we see race. And how that's changed and not changed over the last half century or so. And so one of the ideas I wanted to trace was something that I explored in Who We Be, which is this paradox of the fact that we have images of this rainbow country, a happy rainbow country. And yet, all of the indices were showing a growing inequality all across the board, right, for all Americans, but especially in terms of race. And surprisingly, that indices are also pointing to resegregation. And so what I try to trace in this book is the idea that resegregation is the under-discussed condition of our time. And I'm interested in connecting the dots between what's happening in housing and schooling and health and all of these different types of things together with what is also happening in the popular culture, right? And this sort of gap that we see between the picture of diversity and the reality of growing inequity. And what connects all these struggles, right, isn't just the question of representation, it's also a question of access and a question of power. And so this brings us back to the questions that the movement for Black Lives Matter has forced us all to consider. Because by drawing us to the spectacle of death, right, we are forced to consider what it really means to live, and what it means to live well, and what it means to live together. But how can we choose to live well and live together and with each other? How do we do that? How do we move out of the cycle of crisis?
I certainly don't want, as Jeff has in his book here, vanilla cities with chocolate suburbs, or vice versa.
No, vanilla cities and the chocolate suburbs.
Yes, vanilla cities and chocolate suburbs. We can't have that for the Bay Area, where all of our folks are commuting from Tracy and Ceres and everywhere else. So that's my imperative.
Well, if you see, stereotypes, right, is a psychological concept that was pioneered by a guy named Claude Steele, which is about sort of the way that I see you seeing me in thinking about race, right? So whites, so the way that I see you seeing me thinking about race, okay? So for white folks, the biggest thing that every white person does not want to be is racist.
Yes.
Right? And so the fear of being labeled a racist shuts down the conversation a lot of times. And it's really, really strange, right? You're trying to have these conversations about inequality, but you know, even folks like Bernie Sanders can't bring themselves to really understand, you know, where the racial inequality line is really the main line if you're talking about inequality, you know? And that doesn't allow folks to be able to get at the crisis. And even the liberal kids at Stanford, even the progressive kids at Stanford will come up to me, they can't talk about it. They come up to me and they're like, I know that as a white person I'm not supposed to say anything like this. And I'm like, well, let's try it out. Like, you're just with me, I got the door closed, we can try this out, let's figure this out, maybe
What I found interesting in the filming so far is, to your point, Jeff, there is no language for this. Like, the kind of, you know, a lot of what we're getting from mostly college-age white guys is, whenever I open my mouth, I'm either going to be racist, homophobic, or sexist, so I don't want to say anything at all. Well, we don't want that. Right? I don't want that internal combustion to just manifest. I want us to have a space to talk about it and to have language to talk about it.
And I think that Colin Kaepernick wouldn't have done this 3 years ago. Yeah. And I feel that, you know, absolutely the undocumented movement, absolutely the movement for Black Lives has made it possible for us to even be able to have this amazing kind of conversation tonight with all the candor that we're having. I mean, there was passages in Hui B that I rewrote for 8 years because I didn't want to offend white folks. And
We just had this round table that I really should have filmed. Oh my God, it was in Texas somewhere. And it was predominantly black students and undocumented students talking about what it means to pledge allegiance to the flag. I'm so sorry that I didn't film it. We'll do it again. But it was so incredible. Of course I want immigration reform to happen. Of course, I want to go see my mom. I've been here 23 years. I want papers, right? But these papers and these laws aren't going to make me feel human. They're pieces of papers and laws, right? So, but what was interesting in witnessing that talk was all of a sudden, I think we have to really reframe the conversation around dignity and humanity in a way that is devoid of the partisan politics that is like, look, on November 9th, I mean, we are facing right now, as I'm sure everybody knows, a constitutional crisis in this country. My first introduction to white working class people was Roseanne, the television show, right? When I was in the Philippines, it was dubbed in Tagalog. And I'm like, oh my God, there are poor white people. Where are they? Right? Remember when the electricity got turned off? I was fascinated by that. But like now, I would argue, going to a lot of the conservative Tea Party places that I go to, that we don't really know what white working class people in this country face. Because for the most part, we just stereotype them. The same way they stereotype us. So then, again, where's the ground, right? Let's just remember, this is a blessed place, this area. And I'm saying this as somebody who just was in St. Louis, Nebraska, Oklahoma before that. Like, when I'm like looking around going like, why is your name Jose? Like, I love being in the Bay because they know, what Filipinos are. I don't need to explain that to you, So that, I think we have to remember that, right? Like that, but to your point, I do think that there's this thing about America, and since I've been stuck, I don't want to use the word stuck, but I guess I've been stuck here, for 23 years in which we don't really want to face ourselves, right? Like there's certain things that, I'm amazed that the digital revolution that is like at the heart in this area in San Francisco can walk outside and look at all the homeless people and be okay with it, right? I'm amazed that all this talks about connection, right? My iPhone has more migrant rights than I do as a person. Like, how can my tweets and my Facebook posts and the iPhones can go to places that I and people can't?
So it's really about a place where I think art can actually open a door where people share their heart and their souls and their minds, and where language can open up. Like I'm hearing you say that people can't say it out loud. Well, the art somehow or another can say it, can shout it, and people are willing, it's easier for people to accept.